Starting this review was admittedly harder than what I'm used to doing as of late. With the prior two reviews, I in some form had a sort of personal connection to what it was I was speaking on, whether it was my love of the cyberpunk genre with The Ascent, or me being the one who didn't finish Mass Effect amongst my friends who had multiple times over. But with Psychonauts, aside from very faint memories of seeing it covered more than 16 years ago on the original run of X-Play on G4, it's not one that I really found myself at all connected to. As the release of the belated sequel came closer to launch, however, I found myself looking more into the original, finding that in spite of it being the then latest creation of the beloved Tim Schafer and the team at Double Fine, and is recognized as one of the greatest games ever made, that it actually sold poorly and only really garnered a cult following. Something that seems so unfortunate for a title that's been bestowed such a prestigious recognition within the gaming space by those who have played it. And so with that in mind, the sequel Psychonauts 2, a sequel that initially needed funding via Kickstarter before the company was eventually bought out by Microsoft, had pretty big shoes to fill. Not only did it have to live up to the precedent set nearly 2 decades prior by its predecessor, but also had to exist in the modern gaming space. And though Psychonauts 2 definitely doesn't need to compete against the Call of Duties and other gaming juggernauts, hell, it doesn't even need to compete with games within its own genre. The two things that Psychonauts 2 didn't need to do is prove that, to the fans of the original, 16 years was well worth the wait, and that, to those who haven't played the original, it's something that they can easily get into without feeling lost due to not having played the previous entry, and is an enjoyable experience through and through. And while I can't personally speak on the former, I can, and without further ado, we'll speak on if whether or not Psychonauts 2 is a title you should invest your time into. Taking place mere moments after the original, Raz, the young and eager protagonist along with the titular group of globe-trotting psychics, have saved the group's leader and find themselves in the head of the previous main villain as they attempt to figure out who put them to the task of kidnapping both Grand Head Zeppanato and his brain. It is then that Raz learns Lobato, the insane dentist and kidnapper, was in fact aided by an evil psychic known as Maligula, who is not only an incredibly powerful psychic long thought dead by the Psychonauts, but also has ties to his family's history and their curse of not being able to be in large bodies of water. When the gang goes back to Psychonauts headquarters, Raz is given the title of Psychonaut Intern and, despite having proved himself rather capable, has to further prove himself to the Motherlobe's second-in-command, Agent Hollis Foresight. Once you do so, you set out to reconnect the Psychic Six, the original members that formed the Psychonauts in an effort to stop the revived Maligula. The first thing I want to address when it comes to the story is how it handled being a sequel to a 16-year-old game, in which it does so surprisingly well. Of course, newer players such as myself won't know the finer details of what happened in the previous entry, but what is given here is enough to have a general understanding of what's all gone on. Also, after the opening level and a few cutscenes following, the game falls into its own narrative rather quickly, only occasionally referring back to its predecessor. When it comes to Psychonauts 2's overall narrative, I can say that it's by far the best that I've experienced in 2021. And though there are some shortcomings, such as characters that don't feel very fleshed out, specifically the other interns and another character toward the end of the game, as well as being pretty predictable. The rest of what's going on here, however, I found to be incredibly engaging and endearing. From start to finish, I found the characters incredibly likable, even as some of them were being particularly aggressive toward Raz. The dialogue was on point, balancing both humor and tenderness, and thematically it was absolutely stellar. Psychonauts 2 tackles some pretty heavy themes, such as doubts and mistrust in taking risks, to conflicts of understanding oneself, and other topics that hit a little close to home as someone who's personally struggled with mental health, and does so in a way that seems effortless in how well handled it is. That effortlessness and expertise carries over into the visual storytelling, which is just by far some of the greatest that I've witnessed in gaming. In my last review, I talked about how atmosphere goes a long way in conveying a game's narrative. Here in Psychonauts 2, that couldn't be more on display. Each level places you in the mind of the character that you're trying to help out and is based around the themes being tackled. For example, one character has anxiety to the point that they won't leave their literal bubble. Once inside their mind, you have to partake in a world that's a mix of an obstacle course and cooking game show, hosted by 3 exaggeratedly judgmental puppets that are based on 3 other characters, only they're in goat form. The other minds you explore follow along with this sort of totally wacky yet encapsulating format that reinforces the more direct narrative and make for both awesome, jaw-dropping, and even outright gross environments that you can't help but want to further explore. Psychonauts 2 is an action platformer that sees you navigating Raz through the various fantastical worlds via the more simplistic methods, such as walking, double jumping, and climbing, but also requiring you to use the different special psi abilities you acquire throughout, be it traveling through thought bubbles to reach a platform, hovering over short distances, or creating a drawn version of yourself that can pass through barriers, unlocking them for you to continue on. The usefulness of psi abilities extends into combat as well, with not only those used for navigating having some form of combat specialty, such as the mental connections ability to drag enemies closer to you, but also there being more combat specific abilities such as psi blast, pyrokinesis, and telekinesis to help combat the many different enemy types. Enemies like bad moods and anxiety attacks actually require you to use specific psi abilities in order to overcome them. All of these powers can be improved on via upgrades, which not only allow for varying combat experiences, but also allow for you to reach different places in which you may not have been able to reach before. There's actually a few different ways you can go about acquiring the means to upgrade them as well. Though upgrading abilities simply requires you to raise in rank, this can be done by acquiring experience via combat, buying a psi core, which will require you to combine 9 psi cards you find throughout levels, or finding a psi challenge marker within a level. You can also collect figments, these multicolored imaginations that linger throughout each level and reward you with a rank up when you hit a certain amount collected. No matter which way you go about doing so, once you go up in rank, you get points to allocate towards whatever ability you wish to upgrade. Some abilities may require you to have more points in order to hit a certain level in them, but as you get higher in ranks, you are rewarded more points in order to do so. As you can see, collectibles are a pretty big deal when it comes to Psychonauts 2, as most of which end up rewarding you in some way, essentially incentivizing you to explore each nook and cranny of every level. Be it half-brains, which when 2 are collected give you more mental energy, an extension of your health bar, supply chest and keys, which give you more of the in-game currency for buying the aforementioned psi cores, as well as both cosmetics and a limited selection of psi ability upgrades, memory vaults, which offer extra backstory to the traumas of whoever's head you find yourself in, and even a scavenger hunt that takes you around the mother lobe and rewards you with Raz's outfit from the original. The only non-advantageous collectibles there are the emotional baggages, which are simply multiple bags lost within a level that, once you match with their proper tags, drippily smile for having been sorted out. And though all of this is mostly well done, the only complaint that I have are that checkpoints are kind of frustrating, and during combat I'd occasionally run into the issue of not properly targeting onto enemies. It was occasionally annoying, but never enough to really detract from my experience. Psychonauts 2, I imagine, will be a title that sticks with those who play through it for a very long time once the credits roll. Its endearing nature, unique charm, and handling of mature themes with care made for an experience that, though has its issues in regards to how certain characters aren't particularly fleshed out well, and minor troubles with the combat, never derailed from the experience. I can easily say that after wrapping my 12 plus hours with Psychonauts, it currently sits as my #1 contender for Game of the Year, and now has me considering going through the Double Fine catalog and righting the wrong that is sleeping on this team of absolute creative geniuses. Psychonauts 2 is available on PC, Xbox One, Xbox Series, PlayStation 4, and PlayStation 5. This has been Waxo, and until next time, take it easy.